a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other.
Alberta oil from Alberta down to Nebraska and beyond and into Texas, and allowing the United States to have a larger share of resources from Canada, to buy more oil from Canada.
Canada didn't wake up one morning and suddenly discover another pipeline conversation. This has been simmering for years, and now it's boiling over in a way nobody in Ottawa can pretend is just political noise. Because here's what just landed. Alberta moved like a province that's done asking permission. While federal politicians were still stuck in the familiar loop, climate messaging, committee language, careful phrasing, Alberta went straight to the point that actually matters in energy: access to market. Not a press conference promise, not another "we'll review it."
It was a conversation broached by the Prime Minister about the Keystone XL pipeline, which is a pipeline many Canadians are probably familiar with because it has been around, the idea of it, for more than 15 years.
A real corridor, built to move real volume, tied into real demand south of the border. And the moment that reality set in, you could almost hear the panic alarms going off in the capital. The Prime Minister floated the old idea again. Work with American counterparts, build more pipes, maybe even revive Keystone XL. Canadians have heard that name for so long, it's practically become a symbol, rather than a project, something we argue about in circles while the years pass. The pitch sounds familiar too. Sell another 1 or 2 million barrels a day to the United States, strengthen the relationship, secure the economy.
We have the most abundant and accessible natural resources of any country on Earth, and yet we landlock them, sell what we do produce to a single customer to the south of us, while enabling polluting dictatorships to eat our lunch. For Albertans, these attacks on our province by our own federal government have become unbearable.
But Alberta didn't treat it like a talking point. Alberta treated it like a test. Because if one province is allowed to get its product to market, and another is effectively blocked, then what are we even doing pretending we're operating as a unified country? That's the blunt message underneath the polite words. A country, the argument goes, is supposed to back its regions when they're carrying weight for the whole system. And Alberta has been carrying weight for a long time. What makes this moment different is the method. This wasn't Ottawa leading a national plan. This was Alberta stepping out, dealing directly with the Americans, and proving something Ottawa hates admitting.
We just want to be free. Free to develop and export that incredible wealth of resources we have for the benefit of our families and future generations. Free to pursue opportunities with the ideals of entrepreneurship, hard work, and innovation. Freedom to choose how best to provide health care.
Federal control only works when the provinces cooperate. If a province decides it's done waiting, the authority everyone assumes exists starts to look a lot thinner. And Alberta's frustration didn't come from nowhere. It came from watching major projects get strangled, delayed, buried, or killed. Keystone XL, Energy East, Northern Gateway. Years of momentum, billions on the line, and in the end, collapse after collapse.
It is such an important day for the energy sector of this country. There have been, I know naysayers, and there's no better way to put that to rest than to say, look around you. This is being built.
This project is still facing a court challenge by several BC First Nations, but the hope here is that this pipeline will be completed, opening up new markets and boosting prices for Alberta oil.
Not because the steel couldn't be laid, but because the political will kept folding. Alberta didn't just lose projects, it lost time, leverage, and confidence that the system would ever treat its economy as something worth building around, rather than something to manage and restrict. That's why the language coming out of Alberta is getting sharper. You hear it in the "we just want to be free" framing. Free to develop. Free to export. Free to build prosperity for families. Free to choose how to run services like healthcare. It's not just about barrels. It's about dignity and control.
Hands.
You have, for example, C69 that, according to the Pipeline Association, means you'll never get one approved. Then you have the energy cap, which means that Alberta will never be able to produce enough oil to put in a new pipeline. And then you have the shipping ban that prevents that oil from going anywhere.
When people feel like they're funding the country but being blocked from growing, resentment stops being a political talking point and starts becoming a real identity shift. And then there's the practical reality. Alberta's government is acting like construction is not theoretical anymore. You don't spend hundreds of millions on land compliance and pipe installation if you're still exploring options. Money that big moves because the wheels are turning. Contractors are booked. Equipment is rolling.
You can see pipe on the ground, and within days, maybe a couple of weeks, that pipe will be in the ground. It'll be in the ground before Christmas.
Sections of pipe are being positioned. The difference between a paper project and a real project is simple. You can see it on the ground. That's why the federal reaction looks less like disagreement and more like shock. Not because Alberta is talking tough, but because Alberta moved in a direction that reduces Ottawa's leverage. If the corridor bypasses the usual bottlenecks, if it doesn't hinge on the same set of approvals and choke points, then the familiar playbook loses power. You can't pause what you can't control, and that's the deeper threat Ottawa is staring at. Precedent. If Alberta can do this, what stops other provinces from trying their own direct routes, their own partnerships, their own economic corridors that don't rely on federal blessing? The center of gravity shifts, and once it shifts, it's hard to drag it back. If you're following this story for what it means for Canada's future, tap subscribe right now. This isn't just another pipeline headline. It's about federal power, provincial pushback, and whether the country can still operate like one unit when a major province decides it's done waiting for permission. Subscribe so you don't miss the next update, because this is moving fast and the fallout is only getting louder. Now, let's talk about why Alberta turned south in the first place, because the why explains the intensity. Inside Canada, Alberta ran into walls. Westbound access to Tidewater has been the dream for decades because it opens global pricing instead of being stuck selling mainly to one customer. But BC's tanker ban became one of the biggest symbolic barriers, and federal processes piled on with delays, uncertainty, and rules that critics argue make approval nearly impossible. When you combine that with policy tools like an emissions cap, shipping restrictions, and complicated approval processes, you get a reality where Alberta can produce. But expanding the infrastructure to move that product becomes a political minefield. So, Alberta did what people do when every door is slammed. It found another door. Going south isn't new in practice. Alberta already exports heavily to the United States. The difference now is the scale and the posture. This isn't, we'd like permission to expand. It's, we're building what we need because the market is there and we're not waiting. And the market is there, big time. American refineries have long been designed for heavy crude, and Alberta's product fits that demand. The U.S. also runs enormous daily consumption. A supply gap like that creates a simple truth. The Americans want stable barrels they can count on. And Canada, especially Alberta, is one of the most stable supply sources on the planet. That's why deals with the U.S. can move quickly when both sides see the benefit. Alberta's message is that this is about survival, not symbolism. It's about getting paid fairly for what you produce and not watching global competitors take the opportunities you're too tangled up to pursue. There's a lot of anger in Alberta about the idea that Canada, a country with abundant resources, ends up effectively limiting itself while other regimes with weaker standards fill the gap internationally. People look at that and think, how does that make sense economically, or morally, or strategically? You can also hear the long-term bet Alberta is making. Oil and gas demand isn't disappearing. Tomorrow, the argument from Alberta's side is that it will remain strong for decades, and that even with diversification efforts, energy remains the engine. So, when Alberta talks about building corridors, it's not only about today's prices, it's about locking in infrastructure that keeps revenue stable while the rest of the economy evolves. But here's where things get even more sensitive: the political psychology. Ottawa can debate policy all day, but Alberta is saying we've watched $500 billion in opportunity vanish. Maybe you don't agree with the number, maybe you argue about assumptions, but the emotional impact is real. People remember the cancellations. They remember jobs that were supposed to come, investment that was supposed to land, communities that planned around growth that never arrived. Over time, frustration becomes something heavier: mistrust. Add to that the fact that Alberta taxpayers lost big money on Keystone alone, and you get a province that feels it's been paying the price for federal indecision. And while that's happening, federal transfers still flow. Equalization is a separate policy debate, but emotionally, it's combustible. Alberta's critics might say that's politics, but Alberta's supporters see it as a raw contradiction. Our revenue helps keep the system running, yet the system blocks the projects that generate that revenue. That's why you hear language that's no longer just, "we're unhappy." You hear accusations. You hear claims of being stolen from. Whether or not you agree with that framing, it tells you where the temperature is. People don't talk like that unless they feel cornered for a long time. And now, separatist sentiment is rising, according to Alberta's own premier. That alone should scare every federal strategist in the country, because once that kind of feeling becomes mainstream dinner table talk, it's hard to diffuse with a single announcement or a new committee. So, when Alberta lands a major US-linked corridor, Ottawa's reaction isn't just about a pipeline, it's about legitimacy. If the federal government looks powerless to shape major national economic infrastructure, what exactly is its role? The answer Ottawa would prefer is coordinator and leader. Alberta's move implies a different answer: only relevant when provinces choose to make it relevant.